and welcome to Cahnmann's Current Events Roundtable. Today we have a very distinguished guest, and I'd like to read, before I introduce him, a little bit about him. Over the more than two-century history of the United States, tens of millions of American men and women have answered the call to serve in the defense of our nation. Most did the duty and returned home to their families and friends. Sometimes, though, our brave soldiers, our sailors, our airmen, our Marines, and our Coast Guardsmen fall ill, become injured or wounded, are taken captive, and the worst cases are killed while fighting for our freedoms. There is no other category of casualty that lingers terribly for the families that are left behind, that of a missing in action, which is MIA. And we don't know what happened to these servicemen. In all kinds of situations, however, the Department of Defense has the responsibility of notifying the next of kin, caring for that family as they transition through that difficult time. Today, we are going to learn more about the missing part right after the notification of the next of kin before the funeral. That is a very significant step. It's a casualty assistance. And to help us understand what that is, my guest today is an Army officer, a lieutenant colonel from Fort Sheridan, Illinois, and that is Lieutenant Colonel Christopher Aycock, and I'm very proud to have him on our show today. And welcome, Colonel Aycock, to our show.
Well, thank you for having me, Dr. Cahnmann.
Thank you for being here. And today, my viewers could see I'm wearing my pin of our flag, and I'm very proud to wear our pin. And I'm first of all, I want to thank you for all the work you've been doing, and you've been many years. You've been with the Army for 32, almost 33 years already?
This will be my 33rd year in uniform.
33rd year in uniform, and I want to thank you. Our crew today wants to thank you. Everybody here, our camera people, our director, everyone that works for our station here is proud to have you on our show. So thank you for coming.
Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity to come on and speak with you about this topic. It's something that I do believe is left out of a lot of the discussion about our servicemen and their service, especially when they either go missing or killed in action or are injured. So you letting me come on and talk about this does a wonder. It helps us tell the Army story.
And it's a little bit different. I just want to tell our viewers that it's a little bit different. We're not going to be talking about Afghanistan and Iraq. I mean, that is something we'll have other people come on and talk about. But this is a very important with the issue of what happens when somebody's missing in action, where, what happens to their remains when it's found, what happens when you approach the families. I mean, this is something that we do not know about. I mean, I'm sure everybody in your category and people in the military, of course, knows about it. But for us civilians, all we know about the military is Iraq and Afghanistan and World War II and World War I. We really don't know what happens to the people. And that is why I want you on the show today to tell what we don't know.
As you mentioned, over our history, millions of Americans have served. And most of them have come home, but not all of them. Some of them have died in their service of their nation. And in my case, of what brought us together, I had the distinct privilege and honor of having the most rewarding thing I've done in my 32-plus years of service start just 1 year ago as a casualty assistance officer for a World War II pilot who had been missing since the 23rd of May, 1944.
Are you saying World War II?
That's correct.
World War II, my goodness, okay. I can't tell my viewers how it's about when I came into this world, but...
The significance really to your audience would be that the pilot in question here that I'm talking about was a Chicago native who had joined in 1939, before Pearl Harbor, before we really became involved in World War II, and served first in the Mediterranean, as not as a fighter pilot, but as a cargo aircraft pilot. His name was Joseph M. Obinski, and he was a North Sider from Chicago. Now, with missing personnel, that sometimes takes a little bit of time to resolve.
You would think that, I was just thinking, people are still, and I think I was listening to a film that there's hundreds of thousands of men and women, military, that are still missing.
From World War II, the count may be as high as 78,000. Now, we hope they all come home. The likelihood of finding any alive today is pretty remote.
Do we're still missing people in action now, too, from our current wars.
Our current conflict, I don't believe that there's more than one or two who may be missing. We're much better at accounting for our people now than we were then.
I see. So then they didn't have the accountability, or what would happen? Why was it, like if a military plane went down, I mean, it's a huge plane, why would they not be able to find a plane?
Well, in the case of Captain Obinski's transport aircraft, we have to look at it from the context of not today as we know it, but as it was in 1944.
That's a plane or ship?
That's a plane.
Okay.
It was called the Skytrain.
Okay.
It is probably the most successful aircraft ever made. The C-47 or the DC-3 was a civilian version. And it was flying over the Himalayas. Well, these are very high mountains. Today it's not a big problem because jets can easily clear large mountains. But during that time, there was no GPS. The mountains played havoc with compasses. Weather was terrible, and yet they flew, and they flew, and they flew, and some didn't come back. In the case of Obinski and his crew, 2 lieutenants, a sergeant, and 3 privates who were with Merrill's Marauders, very famous organization that was in Burma during World War II. In their case, theirs was the only aircraft from the 4th Troop Carrier Squadron that failed to return from its mission. So there were a lot of planes, probably as many as 300, that were missing, but from this organization, only that one. Now that became very significant to the people back then. But as time passes, and there's no response in the search, 66 hours of search and rescue, not as we know it today with satellites, with a lot of people on the ground looking. Now, they had to look from the air because there was a war going on. But those 66 hours led to nothing. And by 1946 and 47, the Department of Defense had determined that there was no chance of finding the crew or finding them alive.
So what is your duty with this? I mean, we talked about you're a casualty assistance officer. And before you go into that, I remember you lent me a film called, do you remember that?
It was about the Bent Prop Project.
Okay, which was a project that, that there are people that don't get funded for this, and because they feel that they want to give back to our country, are still looking. It's a group of people that they have that are still looking for the remains of our soldiers from World War II. And so they are the ones that find the remains, and then they bring them back to the United States, and then your job is to what?
The project we were talking about, the film, which
was a documentary.
Was a documentary about the Bent Prop Project.
Right.
And it was interesting. My sister, who is a pilot, gave that to me for Christmas. And on the day that I watched that, and it was very emotional, if you saw in the film, in the documentary, on the day was the day that I got my assignment as a casualty assistance officer.
Oh, that's interesting.
What was even more interesting it was a World War II pilot. So here we are 65 years after the aircraft went missing and the crew went missing. And I see this film.
Yeah, you showed it to, I saw